There we go. Right. So we are learning Sanhedrin, page 7b, Daf Zayin Amud Bet, and we are talking about the responsibility of judges and those appointing the judges. We ended up last week talking about what happens to judges that don't behave themselves, and Reish Lakish is now going to tell us you are not share the screen now, if I can. Let me just get the gemarrah up. There we go. Right. Hopefully you can see the screen with the gemarrah, those of you that don't have it. This is where we're up to over here. Amar Reish Lakish. Move that over there, I think. Yes, Amar Reish Lakish.
We're having difficulty now, Johnny, hearing you.
Freezing, Johnny. You keep freezing, Johnny.
Go back to where you were, Johnny. Go back to where you were.
Okay,
no, that was
without the hot spot. Forget the hot spot. Get to the real.
Over and see what happens. Okay, any better?
Hello, man.
Yeah, okay.
I hear you now.
All right. If I go off again, you just shout out, because of course I can hear myself quite well. So, anybody that appoints a judge, she'eino hagun, who is not fitting, ki'ilu. There's our word ki'ilu. Remember, I told you about this word ki'ilu. It's as if. This is the word like that you will hear a million times in every conversation between two Israelis under the age of 80. Ki'ilu, kilu. You want to sound Israeli, just throw a few ki'ilus in. But it means as if. It is as if notea, he has planted asherah by Yisrael, an asherah in Israel. He's planted an asherah. Okay, so who can tell me what an asherah is? Yes, Leon.
It's a tree.
It is a tree. What kind of a tree is it?
Well, it's for the worshipping. It
is a worshipping tree. You are absolutely right. It is a worshipping tree. Now, I would have expected all of you to know that because we have all learnt it together a long time ago in chapter 6 of Shoftim. Who can remember what happened in chapter 6 of Shoftim?
Is it something to do with when you're in your army, or maybe I'm mixing up places, but you're allowed to chop down you're not allowed to chop down trees unless there's a tree that's being used as a sheriff.
Right, you are in fact on the right lines. Chapter 6, I'm going to try and share the screen with you now. Shoftim, where is it? I've got it ready. Shoftim, yes, I did get it ready. There we go. Let me share the screen with you. There we go. Share the screen. There. I'm sure you've got it ready there, Leon.
I have it now, yes. We've lost sound again, Johnny.
Okay.
Still no sound. Nor are we getting the text on the screen.
Oh, this is difficult.
We've got the text now.
Right, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Right, verse 25 in chapter 6 of Shoftim, please.
Yeah. It happened that night that Hashem said to him, take the young bull that belongs to your father and the second bull, which is 7 years old, and break apart the altar of the Baal that belongs, excuse me, I have a pill in my mouth, and break apart the altar of the Baal that belongs to your father, and cut down the Asherah tree that is near it.
Okay, let's stop there. So that was Gideon, if you will remember. The judge Gideon, or Gidon, was given another name after this. HaKadosh Baruch Hu said to him, go and break down the altar of your father, who is worshipping Baal, and the Asherah tree, which is, as Leon quite rightly said, is a tree that is used for worship. And then, if you remember, what happened next was that Gideon was given a new name. He was called Yerubbaal, the one who argued or fought with Baal. Now, the Asherah tree, as Nachum correctly pointed out, is the only trees that we're really meant to cut down. There is a halachic prohibition in cutting down fruit trees. Any tree that produces fruit in the land of Israel is not allowed to be cut down. Trees, however, which are used for idol worship must be cut down. That is a positive commandment. We must destroy all their Asherah trees when we came into the land of Canaan. Now, particularly in Canaan, because Asherah was the, if you like, the wife of Baal. We see Baal very, very commonly in Tanakh. Baal was the favorite god of the Canaanites, and Asherah, it seems, was his consort. Asherah, and it was informed of in the form of a tree. So I'm going to show you now, if I can just get that up. Yes, there we go. Give me one sec. Right, I'm going to try and share this with you now. I hope this won't disappear. Right, can you see that lovely picture?
Yes.
Yeah, can you see the picture? Someone tell me you can see the picture? Yes, good, thank you. Right, that is an Asherah tree. You can see it's made out of a tree there, this old tree, and it's made into the form of a woman. And there's another, these are all Asherah statues. And here there's a little bit of rubbish here that says Hashem had a wife, Asherah, who is a fertility goddess. So Asherah was, and there's somebody actually making one out of a tree. There's a menorah with made out of a tree sort of thing. So these are called Asherah trees. Now, these were used by the Canaanites particularly as a form of idol worship. So Asherah, the Asherah tree is a form of idol worship, as Leon quite rightly said. And what we're going to see is from Reish Lakish, he's going to bring, as usual, he's going to bring psukim to solidify and prove his point. So let's go to the gemarrah again and see what where he brings it from. Back to the gemarrah. Reish Lakish said, anyone who appoints over the community a judge who is not fit, it's as though he plants an Asherah tree in Israel. Now, where does he get that from? He quotes a pasuk, which you will all be very familiar with, Shene'emar, as it says in the pasuk in Devarim, Shoftim v'shotrim titen lecha. You shall appoint judges and officers for yourselves. Shoftim v'shotrim titen lecha b'chol she'arecha. We've had this pasuk before. We brought this pasuk to show us that the judges sit in the gates of the city, and it is, of course, at the beginning of the Sedra of Shoftim, not the Sefer, the book of Shoftim that I just quoted to you before from chapter 6 in Gideon. This is the Sedra of Shoftim in the book of Devarim. Shoftim v'shotrim titen lecha. Now, v'samich le, and close to that pasuk, it says another pasuk. Lo tita lecha asherah kol eitz. You shall not plant for yourself an asherah of any kind of tree. Let me share with you that verse, and you'll see exactly how it sits next to one another. Here we go. Right, there is the chapter of Shoftim, the chapter of Devarim, verse 18, the beginning of Parshat Shoftim. Have you got it, Leon?
I think so.
Right at the beginning
No.
of Shoftim. It's chapter 16. Yes, chapter 16 of verse 18.
Yep. Right. I'm there now. No. No, it's. I'm sorry. I'm one chapter too ahead of myself. Verse 18. Yes.
Yes.
Judges and officers shall you appoint in all your cities, which Hashem your God gives you, for your tribes, and they shall judge the people with righteous judgment. You shall not pervert judgment, you shall not respect someone's presence, and you shall not accept a bribe, for the bribe will blind the eyes of the wise and make just words crooked. Righteousness, righteousness shall you pursue, so that you will live and possess the land that Hashem your God gives you. You shall not plant for yourselves an idolatrous...
Stop there, Leon, for a second. Just stop there for a... Okay. Okay, stop there for a sec. Those three verses, of course, are the basis of everything that we're learning at the moment. That we said last week, justice trumps all. Those three verses about tzedek, tirdov, shovtim, v'shodrim, titen lecha, setting up judges, judging correctly and righteously. This is what we're talking about. Those three verses sum up the entirety of our discussion in the gemarrah at the moment. And then the very next pasuk, verse 21, Leon.
You shall not plant for yourselves an idolatrous tree, any tree, near the altar of Hashem your God, that you shall make for yourself. And you shall not erect for yourselves a pillar, which Hashem your God hates.
Okay, so there we have, straight after the discussion about justice, we have this prohibition of planting an Asherah tree. This idolatrous tree. Now, on the face of it, that doesn't really join. It's a non sequitur. We're talking about justice, not talking about idol worship now. And of course, Reish Lakish picks up on this. Reish Lakish is basically saying we must learn something from the fact that this there is this juxtaposition, these two concepts of justice and this Asherah tree is there to teach us something. It's not just random. It's not just the random thoughts of God being put this together. The juxtaposition, the closeness of these two psukim is relevant. And Rachel, I'll come to you in a sec, Howard. The Reish Lakish tells us that the reason that this is put together is because if you appoint a judge, because it's talking about appointing judges, shoftim b'shotrim titen lecha, you shall appoint judges, as if you have planted an Asherah tree, you have planted an idol worship tree. Now we have to understand that because of the fact that there was so many Asherah trees around, and it was such a popular idol worship, Baal and Asherah were the most popular idols around. And we know that because the Torah tells us on many occasions to get rid of them. We know that they are, if you like, that's the worst thing you can possibly say to somebody, that you are like an Asherah tree. It's hard to get a bigger insult. I remember when I was on one of these WhatsApp groups, I was on a Moalim WhatsApp group, and I was fighting a lone battle in this group, trying to get people to understand that they shouldn't be doing metzitza b'peh, sucking the blood out after the bris without using a tube. And I was getting all sorts of insults from people, and they couldn't think of a more terrible insult. Whatever insult they could think of, they were throwing at me. I was called an idiot, I was called stupid, I was called an ignoramus, I was called unlearned. And then finally, when they couldn't think of anything worse to call me, they called me reform. So that was like the worst thing they could possibly think of. And that's what's going on here. If you are, Rish Lakish is saying that this pasuk comes to teach us that if you appoint a judge who is not fitting to be a judge, it's the worst possible thing. It's like planting an Asherah tree. How could you possibly plant an Asherah tree? It's the worst thing you could possibly do. So this juxtaposition is telling us how important it is to appoint your judges correctly. I'll just pause there and ask Howard what he would like to add.
We just glossed over something, which is that justice shall ye seek has the same sanction as honour thy father and thy mother, which means it's terrible. I think it's the only one of the 10 commandments that has a sanction attached to it, that thy days may be long in the land I have given you. If you could just put that back on the screen, that justice shall ye seek, I think you'll find that the sanction follows that, the same one.
Okay, there it is on the screen. I hope you can see it. Tzedek, tzedek, tirdov leman tichya, in order that you will live. V'yarashta et haaretz, and you will possess the land. Asher Hashem Elokecha noten lach, which Hashem will give you. Well spotted. The words lema and tichya, in order that you may live. I think that's what you're referring to. The reward, as it were, for pursuing justice correctly is that you shall live and possess the land. The reward that you're referring to in the 10 Commandments for honoring the father and mother is similar, in order that your days may be lengthened in the land. Leman tarich yamim, you shall get arichat yamim, you shall get long life. You're right.
In the land that I've given you.
That's the point. That is the point, exactly. Come to you in a sec, Sharon. That is exactly the point, Howard, that if we don't appoint judges appropriately, in other words, if our judges do not pursue justice in a just and righteous way, the Torah is telling us clearly that we will be flung out of the land. You will live in the land, and also if you look at the pasuk again, it will tell you that it's not just in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. Notein lach. Can you see that? Notein lach in the present tense, correctly translated on the screen here as Hashem is giving you. In the present tense. Now the reason for that, one sec, Nachum, I'll come to you again in a minute. The reason that it says notein lach, giving you in the present tense, is that every single day that we are in the land of Israel, sovereign in the land of Israel as we are now for the first time for 3,000 years, well, since the time of Hanukkah actually, was the last time we were sovereign in the land before now. But what it means is that every day that we are in there, we are being given that gift by God. It wasn't a one-off gift, Natan lach, which God gave you. God is giving it you every single day. And every single day you have to know that if you don't do tzedek tirdov, you'll be booted out. And that is, I think, what you were referring to, Howard.
Okay. Well,
okay.
And honor thy father and thy mother. It's equally as important.
Exactly. So justice trumps all, as we have said. This gemarrah is teaching us. Sharon, you wanted to say something, and then Nachum after Sharon.
Yes, first of all, this is right following Howard's comment on the conditionality and the delicacy. We are balanced on the fulcrum of losing the land every single minute of every single day of every single hour. But that just to emphasize, as I said, the obvious, which is that these verses are juxtaposed anti-magic, that you have to have officers, you have judges and like policemen, and all of these things are the same, and justice are not magical, they're not mystical, they're very rock solid rules, and that anything other than that becomes idol worship and magic worship, and that they have nothing, no place together in Jewish civic life.
Okay, thank you, Sharon. That's excellent point to point out there. And again, if you think about the context that this was spoken in, this was Moshe Rabbeinu just before they went into the land. Remember, they've spent 40 years in the desert, wandering around, being judged by Moshe, and direct contact almost with God. They're now about to go into the land. They're about to take on civic duties, as it were, for the first time. And they are used to divination, aren't they? They're used to going to Moshe Rabbeinu. They're going to Aaron and the Urim V'Turim, the breastplate with all the lights on, etc. So the point that you make that it's a warning against divination is very, very apropos the time it was said as well, because this is a warning from Moshe to the people to say, no, now is the time you are going to become responsible for your own civic actions, and you have to do it in a righteous and just manner. Thank you for that excellent point. Nachum.
Are the non-Jews, you think God is telling them the same thing, or is this whole subject related just to Jews? Wouldn't God create the world with this concept without just affecting the Jews?
Well, we are supposed to be Or LaGoyim. We are supposed to be the light unto the nations. We are supposed to be the nation through whom the whole of the world is blessed. You'll remember the bracha to Avraham Avinu, v'nivrechu v'cha kol mishpachot ha'adama. Through you, all the families of the world will be blessed. And we've said many times before that the way in which that the world is blessed through us is through emulation. So we are meant to be Or LaGoyim. We are meant to set the standards for the world. And in fact, and Nachum, if you look back through history, we have set the standards for the world largely, not always. We don't always behave as Or LaGoyim, and not every individual is a light unto the nation, but they should be. But as a whole, the Jewish people have been and need to continue to be an Or LaGoyim, a light unto the nations. So if that's the way we're meant to behave, then yes, it is an injunction for the whole of the world to behave in a just way and to avoid idol worship, whatever idol worship means in that particular generation. We have a different type of idol worship today, of course, that they did in those days. Anybody that gets a piece of tree and bows down to it today will be considered to be bonkers. But if you just have a look at a bit of old footage of Beatlemania, from the 60s, which is repeated itself in various guises over the years, or even Rebbe worship in the Hasidic world, you will see a modern day type of idol worship, which we have to avoid. So yes, I agree with the answer, I think, to your question, which I think was a rhetorical question, which is, yes, it's meant to be for the whole world, and we are meant to lead the way. Just as a by the way, I'm sure that you read this, I'm sure all of you have read it, but it's worth mentioning. Prince Charles, in his Hesped for Rabbi Sachs at the Shloshim, described him using the Hebrew words. He described him as an Or LaGoyim, a light unto the nations. Very interesting that Prince Charles said that.
So what's the priority?
And he used the Hebrew expression itself in the Hebrew Or LaGoyim. Johnny Halpin. Johnny.
Yeah, who or how many people appointed judges in those days?
who and how many people appointed the judges? How many, I don't know, but who would have been when you say in those days, are you talking about when they first went into the land, or are we talking?
Well, talking about now.
We're talking about okay, if we're talking about the Sanhedrin time, then it would have been the Sanhedrin itself, the Rosh Sanhedrin and the Sanhedrin themselves. When they had a vacancy, as it were, then it was the judges themselves that appointed the next judge that came on the panel, as it were. What happened when they first went into the land, I'm not sure who appointed them. I guess it would have been the Shofet, the judge of the time, during the time of judges. But in the time of the Sanhedrin itself, there was a method of appointing judges, and it was a sort of a cab rank of seniority. You sort of worked your way up the seniority ranks into the great Sanhedrin.
In the column on the left, Johnny, and Halacha and the Steinsaltz, it said the judge who is appointed for monetary reasons alone, it is prohibited to honor him. Could you explain why that would be?
We're coming to that in a minute. It's called corruption, Johnny.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm sure you've never even heard of that word.
They can't even spell it.
They appoint judges are appointed in Israel in that process, in which the judges on the Supreme Court of Israel, they're the ones that bring new blood to the court, and they often provide this.
Well, it's the same. It's
a systemic corruption.
I don't know how they're appointed in Israel. Does anybody know how judges are appointed in Israel? Julia seems to know. I'll come to you in a second, David Marks. Yes, Julia, tell us how they're appointed.
I don't actually know, but when we went to the Supreme Court on the trip some time ago, I remember that it was a panel, so that there were 3 judges, 3 representatives of the government, 3 lay people, and that it was a mix of people that appointed the judges. And I don't believe myself that that is an unreasonable way of appointing. And I don't believe it gives rise to corruption, but I do think that there are a lot of people who agree with Nachum, who do seem to think that. And I'm not really quite sure why, because it seems to me that it's quite representative.
Okay,
Julia's actually correct. Julia's correct about they've been changing how they appoint the judges by shifting the number of people in each of those 3 areas.
Group of 9. There have been allegations of corruption as to how those people are appointed, how the people who appoint judges are appointed. But basically, I think it's a very good and non-political method of appointing judges.
Okay, it seems to be very different in America. I don't really know the system in America, but it seems to be a very political scenario in America. Larry and Sharon or Nachum, can you enlighten us on how the judges are picked in the States?
In the federal system, because remember we have a bifurcated system. In the federal system, the senators often make recommendations to the president, who has the final say. The state we came from, the state of Washington, the senators delegated it to a committee of 4 or 5 different individuals who would make recommendations to the senators, who would then pass it on to the president. So if you had Democratic senators, or they actually in our state tried to work it out so they would appoint one Democrat-leaning judge one time, and the next time it would be a Republican-leaning, and they sought for fairness, but ultimately it's the president of the United States who makes the decision, and then and to the Supreme Court and to the federal lower courts, and then ultimately the Senate has to pass on the judge or justice, as the case may be.
Yeah, that's a big difference. When you have the president bring a name, that's all he does. He only brings a name that he would like to see to be the Supreme Court justice. But it takes the vote of the senators in order to have it happen. So he can say whatever he wants. But the ultimate decision, if this person's going to sit on the bench of the United States Supreme Court, is a matter for the elected people of the country to decide, yes, we will accept them. And that's the difference between Israel. Israel does not have such a system where a type of judge that wouldn't be decent or respectable could get through, because they're picking their own people each time. Anyway.
Okay.
Nachum, you're dreaming. When Trump chose someone, the Republican Senate was in the majority and they automatically pick it. And it's true with the Democrats as well. So whatever party controls the Senate, or for example, just one more, when the wonderful judge from the District of Columbia was nominated by Obama, the Republicans who had control of the Senate just stalled it for months. Merrick
Garland.
Okay.
Garland.
I would like to make a comment. I would like to make a comment on this this process which we've just described, because I think it's very important. We have just read a gemarrah. Remember, the gemarrah was written 1,500 years ago. We just read a gemarrah to say how important it is to have the Lakish tells us that if you do it wrongly, it's like you've planted an Asherah tree. The mere description of a judge as Democrat leaning or Republican leaning, to me, is anathema. A judge should not be leaning in either direction, nor should a judge be appointed by a political system. As an outsider to the American system, it seems to me to be as far away from tzedek tirdov, from judging in a just manner as could possibly be, because the whole appointment of the system appears to me to be political. And I don't know if that is how it's viewed in America, but it's certainly how it seems to me as an outsider, that this is a political appointment and not a justice appointment.
No, the idea is, it's like the Torah. We want our judges to be looking at the Torah and making their decisions on the Torah. The ideas that you just heard, these judges are inclined to look at the Constitution of the United States the way it's written. And we often have judges who make up their own ideas of what the Constitution is written. And it's not what the judges are supposed to do in America. They're supposed to be there for life, and they're supposed to do the job according to what the Constitution of the United States says they're supposed to do. They're not free to go do whatever they feel and start legislating when it's not their right. Their right is to follow the law, the same as the judges in Israel. Their job is to follow the Torah. You get off the Torah, now you're making your own Torah. And the same in America. In the States, you have some judges decided that they're the legislature. They're the voice of the people. That's not what they were for. They're supposed to be committed to what the Constitution says. So that's the way it is.
Okay, action now, so I can't. Okay, it's Sharon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
No, Sharon. Yes, Sharon, speak to me.
I'll speak to you. When you say Republican or Democrat leaning, I think that that's in some ways a misnomer. Traditionally, the parties have had different ways of construing the Constitution. The Constitution does not have a clause saying what Chaim Yankel's case against Sarah Schwartz's outcome should be in a particular fact situation. The Constitution is a broad viewpoint on how government should function. Some people see it, as Nachum said, as strict, unbendable, literal, and some people see it as flexible and adaptable to the fact that it was written over 200 years ago and must respond to the changing culture and civilization that it forms the framework for. And that's called strict construction versus loose construction. And we've seen much of the same conversation when the Supreme Court here deals with Israel's basic law. And we've seen much of the same conversation within Judaism as we look at the halacha and the viewpoint toward how bendable, how flexible, how adaptive, how individualized it should be. And so I think these concepts are universal when you have a framework that seeks to do justice instead of magic.
Okay, that's fascinating to me because I had no idea about that. I just hear the words Republican leaning and Democrat leaning, and it sounds very political. The way you've just described it, Sharon, is exactly how it works in the Jewish world. We have the Haredim who take a very strict and literal view of the halakha. We have modern Orthodox who try and adapt that halakha to the modern world. And then we have the more liberal interpretations, Reform, Conservative, Progressive, who go further and say, well, these laws are no longer applicable, and it's a spectrum. So that's very interesting to me.
The Masorti do not say that. They have their entire own halacha committee, which works on halacha. So you can't lump any of those movements in with one another when it comes to halachic decisors.
Indeed, it's a spectrum. It's a spectrum of interpretation based on the Torah and the halakha. So that's very interesting. Okay, let's move on, because although that was really interesting, oh, we've got some people want to speak. Okay, David, I promised you a few minutes ago, we got a bit involved in there. David.
Yeah, just going back to the gemarrah. First of all, Nachum's question, does the rules relating to Shoftim v'Shotrim Ten Lecha B'chol Sharecha apply to the non-Jews? In a few years' time, we'll be getting to a sugya in Gemara Sanhedrin about the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, and this is included as one of the 7 laws that were given to B'nai Noach at the time. So something to look forward to. On the specific Gemara that we've just read, one of my favorite Mefarshim is the Balaturim, and he discusses the juxtaposition between Shoftim v'Shotrim Ten Lecha B'chol Sharecha and Lo Tita Lecha Asherah Kol Etz. He says if you take the gematria of the word Asherah, it's Dayan She'eino Hagun, exactly as you said, a Dayan that's not fit to be a judge. And then he goes further. If you take the phrase Asherah Kol Eitzel Mizbach, it's the same gematria as the phrase Rasha Eitzel Tzadik, a wicked person next to a righteous person, which he interprets one of 2 ways. Either by appointing a corrupt judge next to a tzaddik of a judge, and this is the result. And then later on, again, something to look forward to in Gemara Sanhedrin in a few years' time, there's apparently a prohibition of burying a rasha next to a tzaddik.
Okay, now that's really interesting. Just on the point of the gematrias, you either love them or you don't with gematrias. But
it's
even
an asmachta, as we said before.
Even if you don't love them, you have to marvel at these at the genius of the people that have worked out these gematrias. Nowadays, you know, you go to every Sheva Brachas that you go to, and somebody makes a speech, they'll find you a gematria of the name of the Chosin and Kala and some postuk in the Torah that fits. But it's no big deal now, because you can go onto Google and there is a website that will find it for you. All you have to do is work out the gematria of the name of the Chosin and Kala, put the number in, and it'll come up with a postuk for you. It's dead easy. You can look dead clever. But the problem is, of course, everybody knows that that's done now. But the Baal HaTurim didn't have Google, and he didn't have this website. He probably had to write the website for himself. It's genius what the stuff that they come up with. So whether you like it or you don't, you have to marvel at the amazing ability, particularly of the Baal HaTurim. Baal HaTurim loved gematrias, and there's It's hundreds of them, thousands of them probably, that the Baal HaTurim quotes, and it's really quite amazing. I actually like that one very much, because Asherah and Dayan Shelo Hagun are exactly the words in the Gemara. There's no kvetch there. There's no. Sometimes they're a bit, you think, well, that's stretching it a bit, but this one's perfect. So I like that one very much. Thank you, David.
Phil Feingold did them, Johnny, without a computer.
Another genius. Phil Feingold was another genius. I'm not sure he's in the level of the Baal HaTurim, but he was a genius for sure. Okay. Who wanted to speak before we move on? I'd like to do a little bit more Gemara before we leave
Johnny,
today. Yes, Howard.
Apart from the fact that Howard Epstein has the same gematria as self-opinionated busybody, I would like to take issue with Sharon over one thing. It's all very well to suggest that Supreme Court judges in America are not affected by the fact that they were appointed politically. That breaks down completely when it comes to abortion and Second Amendment decisions. The most recent case on gun, the right to carry guns, for to have a well-regulated militia, was decided on the basis that it extended to having a gun in your own home for self-protection. Now, if that's not a politically inspired decision, I don't know what is.
Well,
okay, I'm not going to ask you to reply to that, Sharon. We're getting too political here.
You're frozen, Johnny.
Yes, we can't hear you. The sound has gone completely, Johnny.
I've certainly learned something about, grateful to you for that, later on. But in the meantime, right, can you hear me? Because it says, please. No, you can't hear me. Leon, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Now you can. Okay. Okay, I'm sorry about this. It seems that the internet connection is not as good in Salford, UK, as it is in Poleg, Israel. For some reason, I can't really explain that. Maybe God is on your side and not on our side here in the UK. Let's carry on to see what happens next in the Gemara. Let me go back to the screen for you. Right, there we are. We're back in the Gemara. So, you shall not plant for yourself an asherah of any kind or any kind of tree. Amar Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi says, Uvimkom sheyesh talmidei chachamim, and in a place where there are scholars, and in brackets, and you then go ahead and appoint, there's our word again, ilu, it's as if you have planted it, i.e. you've planted this asherah tree, etzel mizbeach, right next to the altar of God. So in other words, not only is it the worst thing you can possibly think of to plant one of these things, you've gone and done it right next to the altar of God. And he brings a verse there, etzel mizbach Hashem Elokecha. Let me see if I can find you the verse again from Deuteronomy. There it is. Let's get it back up on the screen. There we go. Accolades. You shall not plant for yourself, which you shall make for yourself. That you shouldn't isbeach Hashem. Now the Old told that the appointing of a scholar who is not fitting, where there is a fitting scholar, and I suppose this is all subjective, of course, but I suppose this would apply to a situation where there is a bad appointment, whether it's a politically bad appointment or whether it's a corrupt appointment, whatever the reason is, if you overlook a person who should be made a judge and you appoint somebody of a lower standard, the Gemara is telling us, Rav Ashi is telling us, that says it's not only like you've planted an idol worship tree, you've actually gone and had the chutzpah to plant an idol worship tree right next to the Mizbeach. And that makes it even worse. So that's from that one pasuk. Now, there's another alluded to earlier on. Ktiv, there is another verse. Lo ta'asun iti, do not make with me, Elohei chesef, gods of silver, Velohei zahav, and gods of gold. Okay, so the verse in Shmot 2020, which I will show you now. 2020 is over here. There we go, 2020. Now, does anybody know where, apart from David Marks, does anybody know where this comes from? I've given you a clue telling you it's in Exodus 2020, but where in the Torah does this appear, where it says you shall not make gods of silver and gods of gold? Any offers?
After the Ten Commandments.
Correct. Immediately after the Ten Commandments. If I scroll up the screen, you will see here, there you go. Honor your father, honor your mother, you shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery. We've got in the Hebrew over here, kabed es avicha v'tzimecha, and then just a few, there's the end of the Ten Commandments. Here we go. Lo tachmod beit re'echa, lo tachmod eshet re'echa, v'avda b'matov v'shor v'chamer v'chol shorecha. You shall not covet. That's the end of the Ten Commandments. And then just what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 verses later, we have this verse here. You shall not make Elohei chesef v'Elohei zahav. Now, we go back to the gemarrah. And you will see that what we're talking about here is Julia's favorite subject, and that is the word Elohei. Here we go. Clearly, the simple explanation of the verse I've just shown you, because it's after the Ten Commandments, means don't make gods of silver and gods of gold. In other words, don't make idols out of silver and gold. Now, the Gemara asks an obvious question. Elohei chesed ve'Elohei zahav hu de la avdi ha de'etz shari. Does that mean that only gods of silver and gold are forbidden, and it's permitted to make a god of wood? And obviously that's a rhetorical question. The answer is of course not. So in other words, what Rav Ashi is saying here is asking a question. He's saying, why are we specifically told that we shouldn't make gods of silver and gods of gold when we shouldn't make gods of anything? We shouldn't make gods of wood, we shouldn't make gods of stone or plastic or anything else. Why does it just say gods of silver and gods of gold that you shouldn't make? And this is the Shivim Panim LaTorah bit, the different layers of the Torah. Rav Ashi says to us, Elohah haba bishvil kesef. An Elohah, a god that comes because of gold, and a god that comes because of silver. And of course, this is what I was referring to a minute ago with Julia. Loved this bit when the word Elohah refers to a judge. That was right at the beginning of our Gemara. We learnt the whole idea of where do we get 3 people, 3 judges of monetary cases, from the use of the word Elohim 3 times when it talks about a ganaf being brought before the court. So Elohah is used not only to mean God, but it also means a judge. So Rav Ashi interprets this pasuk homiletically to mean that you shall not make, let's go back to the pasuk, lo ta'asun iti, do not make with me, Elohei kesef, do not make gods, i.e. judges, who come because of silver. In other words, you bribe them, or you pay, you give them silver and become judges, or gold. So it's an injunction against the appointment of judges for gold and silver. This is where I think we can do a bit more. We've got a few more minutes. So this is the idea here. We've finished now this little subject of the appointment of judges. Previous weeks we did we spoke about the importance of judges being honest and righteous in their own judgments. Now we've gone one step back and said those appointing the judges have to do it in a righteous manner. And we've spoken about how important that is. And if you don't do that, it's as if you have planted an idol worship tree next to the altar of God. Just about the worst thing you can possibly do, except be reformed. Now we've finished that little topic, and we are going to speak about humility. Which, of course, is an important trait that a judge should have. Those of you, I'm sure it's the same in America. I'd be very surprised if it isn't, and in Israel. I don't have any experience of being in court either in America or in Israel, but certainly in England, humility is not something which you would normally associate with the judges. I would not necessarily, that would not be the first adjective that comes, humble would not be the most adjective, the most obvious adjective to describe the judges that I've come across in my life. I could think of many more apt ones than humble, but the gemarrah is now going to teach us that humility is actually a very important trait for a judge. Let's go back to the gemarrah now and have a look. For the last few minutes, we'll start the subject of humility amongst the judges. Here is the gemarrah telling us a story about Rav. Rav, ki hava ate lebeidina. When Rav Amar, he would say to Amar Hachi, he would say this, and he was talking about himself. Birut nafshei liktala nafeik, utzvi beita le hu avid v'reikan lebeitei ayal ulevei shetehei bia kitzia. What's all that about? So Rav Steinsaltz translates it brilliantly. He says this about himself: by his own will he goes out to danger of death, because a judge who misjudges a case is liable to receive the punishment of death at the hand of heaven. He recognizes the very serious nature of the work he's about to do. And he says to himself, I need to remind myself that what I'm about to do could bring about terrible consequences for me, because if I make a mistake, then I'm liable to be put to death, as it were, by the hand of heaven. And then he goes on to say this: and he does not do what is necessary to provide for the needs of his house, and he enters his home empty-handed, because a judge does not receive a salary. And this is the connection between the previous gemarrah, which says don't make gods of silver and gods of gold. In other words, a judge should not take on an appointment because it's a good salary. That's not to say that you shouldn't offer a good salary to a judge, because you have to compensate the judge for the fact that he's no longer working in the non-judge role that he had before, whatever that might be. Usually it's something to do with the law, either as an advocate of some sort or somebody who knows the law. He would be paid to do that. So a judge has to be compensated for the loss of his salary, but it's not, in fact, a salary. It's a bit of a swizz. It's a bit of a trick. It's a bit like saying you don't pay the rabbi for giving a sermon on Shabbos because you can't work on Shabbos, and you're paying him for all the preparation that he does during the week to give the sermon. Same for the chazan. He has to practice the singing to make sure it's right on Shabbos. You're not paying him for working on Shabbos. It's a bit of a tricky thing because really you are paying him for working on Shabbos, but we say that you're not, and we get around it by saying you're paying him for the preparation. Here it's the same thing. We are really paying the judge's salary, but the judge importantly has to feel that he's not being paid a salary. It's not something that it's just compensation for not earning a salary elsewhere. Rav tells us that he enters his home empty-handed. A judge does not receive a salary. If only it should be that his entry into his home will be the same as his departure, without sin or transgression. So Rav would say to himself, as it were, I left home this morning not having done any sins, or at least not having judged incorrectly. I want to return home tonight. It's a prayer to God. May I return home tonight safe in the fact that I'm not liable the death penalty because I've made a mistake, and clean of sins, clean of the sin of making a wrong judgment in the same way as I left home this morning. So Rav would utter this prayer, as it were, to demonstrate his humility, knowing that what he was doing was a very important task, and that he had to do it in such a way that he would not be held liable for having made an erroneous judgment by not doing his very best. You make an erroneous judgment, you've done your very best, well then you're not entirely responsible for that. We had that before last week when we spoke about the getting expert witnesses and getting expert help, so that you don't get the whole beam of responsibility on your neck. You only get a splinter. You remember we spoke about that last week and the week before. This is the same idea. What Rav is saying here is, I just want to do my best so that I can enter my home tonight having not made a wrong judgment. And that is the humility. This demonstrates the humility of Rav at that time. And I just want to, I know we're just over the hour mark, but I just want to share this with you because it's so wonderful. And I'm just going to quickly whiz through the next few lines as an introduction to show you something which I stumbled across a couple of weeks ago, and I want to share with you. And we'll go over this again next week in detail. But I just want to read what it says. In a similar demonstration of humility, when Rav would see a convoy of scribes, meaning scholars, following after him to honor him, he would say, though his excellency mount up to the heavens and his head reach the clouds, he shall perish forever like his own dung. They who have seen him shall say, where is he? This is a quote from Eov, which we'll go through next week, Job. But basically what he's saying is, when he was honored by loads and loads of people running after him because he's a big Talmud Chacham and giving him covered and doing the Beatlemania Rebbe worship stuff, he would say, don't be taken up by all of this. I'm going to perish forever, just like my own dung, just like everybody else. I remember my father of blessed memory used to have a rather improper saying, which was a similar idea, was that these people who thought that they were so fancy and so honored that everyone was running after them, they think that their own poo doesn't smell, when actually it smells just the same as everybody else's. And that's what Rav was saying here, that he was not going to get taken up with all this idol worship, all the scholars running after him. And I want to share with you something now before we finish, which describes this. One of the most humble Talmidei Chachamim of the previous century was a man called the Chafetz Chaim, Rabbi Yisrael Meir Kagan of Radin. Many of you will have heard of the Chafetz Chaim. The Chafetz Chaim was a man who lived, there he is, there's a, thank you very much, Marcel. There is a picture, supposed picture of the Chafetz Chaim, and I say a supposed picture advisedly. The Chafetz Chaim died in 1933 at the age of 95. Now, if he died in 1933, I'm not exactly sure when cameras came out, but it was a long time before 1933, and by
1840 cameras.
Right. Okay. So thank you. Cameras had been out almost 100 years by the time the Chafetz Chaim died, and so you would have expected there to be some photographs of the Chafetz Chaim because he was the #1 sage of his generation. Amazingly, there are very few photographs of the Chafetz Chaim, and I am going to try and show you one of them now. Here is a picture which I'm going to share with you now. There is the only true picture that we think of the Chafetz Chaim. This fellow here with a little beard is the only picture of the Chafetz Chaim. The one that Marcel just showed us, which is that picture there, it's not sure that is him. That's the picture that everybody puts up with the Chafetz Chaim. It's a very, very famous picture. It's a painting. It is said, I don't know if this is true, but it is said that actually that was his wagon driver or his shamus, because he did not want to be painted, did not want to be photographed, because he did not want adulation. But there is a photograph of the Chafetz Chaim, and that is quite a rare thing because he did not want to be photographed. The absolute epitome and personification of humility. And now I am going to show you something even more amazing than that. If you just give me one moment to get it ready. Oh, no, I can't do it that way. 1 second. Right, I'm ready now. Have a look at this, everybody. Have a look at this. This is the only footage of the Chafetz Chaim. Now, I want you to have a look at this and see the contrast between some of the knackers that are coming into this Agudas Yisrael meeting in 1923 compared to the Chafetz Chaim, which you will see in about 30 seconds. Just have a look at this. This is amazing. That is not the Chafetz Chaim. The Chafetz Chaim, this guy is obviously clearly a knacker because he's got a long beard and a top hat, but that is not the Chafetz Chaim. Interesting, look, most of these knackers in the Aguda don't have beards at all. Okay, here comes another knacker with an umbrella. He's obviously important because he's got an umbrella. And there's some other folk we haven't seen. And here is the Chafetz Chaim. There he is. That, look at him looking down at the ground. He's not looking around looking for adulation. That is the only footage of the Chafetz Chaim. And there we go. That's it. Somebody comes along with his hand over the camera and stops the filming because the Chafetz Chaim does not want to be filmed. That, ladies and gentlemen, is humility personified. That was the Chafetz Chaim, and that is the only photograph of the Chafetz Chaim known, as far as I can see, and the only piece of video footage of the Chafetz Chaim taken in 1923 when he was aged about 85 years old. So I wanted to share that with
Thank Johnny.
You, just because Rav has told us how to behave in a humble way. The Chafetz Chaim should be our beacon on that. Yes, Johnny Halpin, and then Marcel.
I think our late Rosh Hashiva, Rabbi Siegel, also used to walk with his head bowed down to the pavement all the time. Very, very humble man.
He did, and he was indeed. Rav Yehuda Zev Siegel, the Manchester Rosh Hashiva, was indeed a very humble and saintly man. And just as a by the way, he also, something amazing, he never ever said a bracha without a siddur. Even Shahakol Nia Bidvara, when he'd have a glass of water, he would say it out of a siddur because he wanted to make sure that he concentrated properly and didn't get the words wrong.
Was also on the wall. Asher Yotza was also on the wall in front of in the loo.
Yeah, he was, I think, the next generation's Chafetz Chaim. I agree with you, Johnny. Thank you for reminding me of our Rosh Hashiva. I've got a picture of him on my wall, actually. It was very interesting. I must tell you about this. I was doing a bris. I can tell you exactly how long ago, because I remember whose bris it was, and it was in my Yehuda's year. So 27 years ago, I was doing a bris, and it was a great nephew of the Rosh Hashiva. Those of you who are from Manchester may know Bernard Levy. Some of you will know his brother Stephen Levy, who is the head of the Shabbaton choir. So Bernard Levy's wife was a Seagull, part of the Rosh Hashiva's family. And when Bernard had a son, Joshua, Yehoshua, I did the bris. And of course, the Rosh Hashiva, being a great uncle, came to the bris, and it was a big honor, and he was the Sandik, and that was the only time I ever did a bris with the Rosh Hashiva as a Sandik, and it was very nerve-wracking, actually, because he was such a saintly man. And I've got a brilliant photograph that somebody took after the bris of the Rosh Hashiva speaking to me. He was quite a short man, like the Chafetz Chaim, and although I'm not very tall, I was taller than him, and I'm leaning forward. It was a noisy place. I'm leaning forward, and he's speaking quietly into my ear, and somebody photographed this, and I've got it on my wall. And it's a brilliant photograph. What the photograph doesn't tell you is that the Rosh Hashiva was actually, in a very, very kind way, telling me off, because he was not happy with the way I pronounced the word of the bracha ha'olam. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech ha'olam, asher kiddushanu mitzvot v'tzivonu al hamila. That's the bracha that the Moel makes, who's commanded us to do the Brit Milah. So he was telling me that I was not clear enough in my pronunciation of the word ha'olam. That is what that photograph on the wall, he was telling me at the time. It looks a great photograph that we're having an earnest conversation. Actually, I'm getting a telling off from the Rosh Hashiva. So, when you next make a bracha, whenever that may well be, just think of the Rosh Hashiva and concentrate on the words that you're meant to be saying correctly. So thank you for reminding me, Johnny, of that. That's
it was the Sandig at my Brit, the Rosh Hashiva.
Say that again, Johnny.
Rosh Hashiva was the Sandig at my bris.
Really? Okay.
Yes.
Well, I hope your Moel said the bracha correctly. Otherwise, I may have to do it again for you, Johnny.
It was one of the Ellsbergs, I think.
Yeah, it was probably
Sydney.
Probably
Sydney Ellsberg, no?
Shimshon, yeah, probably. He was my Moel as well. Marcel.
Just for what it's worth, the Chafetz Chaim is buried on Har HaZeitim in the road just behind my late father-in-law. I've seen there the kever.
That's not correct, Marcel. The Chafetz Chaim is not buried in Israel. The Chafetz Chaim is buried in Eastern Europe somewhere, because I have a photograph of, I'm absolutely certain, I have a photograph of my, the Chafetz Chaim is not buried in Israel. I'm absolutely certain, because when Dan was in Jewish grammar, they went on a grave hopping tour to Eastern Europe, and I have a wonderful photograph of my Dan standing at the keva of the Chafetz Chaim. So I'm 99.9% sure. I'm never 100% sure of anything, but I'm 99.9% sure that the Chafetz Chaim is not buried in Israel. So when you're next there, have a look who it is.
When I can travel again, I'll try and go and have a look and check that.
Yeah, go and have a look and send us a picture. I'm sure somebody is Googling it as we speak. Somebody Google where the Chafetz Chaim is buried while Howard speaks to us. Howard?
Well, I just wanted to rather prosaically go back to the word et. You shall not make with me. It obviously doesn't mean out of me. I assume it means alongside me, in competition with me.
Yeah, I think so. I also spotted that, Howard, and I thought about what it might mean. And I think you're right. It means alongside me, in competition to me, and that fits with what the gemarrah says, which is it's like building planting an asherah tree next to the mizbeach. It's almost like in competition with the mizbeach of Hashem. So I think you're right to point out that word iti. I think that's exactly what it means. Yes, Julia.
Johnny, is there such a tree as an asherah tree, or it's a tree that you turn into a tree for
It's
worship.
it's a tree that you turn into an Asherah. Yes, Julia.
I have two things. I'd like to know if it's correct that when he said that they received no salary, that it was, as you suggest, happens now, and it was the same then, or if in fact they received no salary, because it really links back to the discussion that we had last week, which was about the financial status of the judges. And I really would like to know a bit more about whether they were all wealthy men. I mean, obviously, lots of the students weren't, and we know Akiva that he was poor, but it'd be interesting to know what their financial status was and if they did get paid. Another thing that I would like to ask, please, is I know that there are various lawyers in this group, and I should have asked this a year ago, but I would actually like to know more about who the other people are in this group and what their backgrounds are. I mean, I hear Nachum, and he clearly doesn't rate lawyers very highly. I'd like to know what his career is, and we've got a group. Can we do that?
Yeah, of course we can. We can do that. Perhaps not right this second.
No.
It's, time to go. But yeah, we can do that. That's a good idea. We are quite a little cohesive group, especially our gemarrah shiur. I think I've said to you in the past that this is actually my favorite shiur of the week. And I think partly that is because it's a smaller group and it's a very nice cohesive group. Yeah, we can certainly do that. Let me answer the first point. The gemarrah, the notes in the art scroll gemarrah, which I was using to prepare this morning, do seem to indicate that the judges were given compensation for lack of employment. So call that a salary, call it what you like, call it a stipend, I don't know. It seems, certainly from the art scroll's understanding of it, that they weren't just independent men of other means, and that this was like the JPs in UK who do their judging for free. It seems that they were compensated at least for lack of employment during that time. Okay, the Chafetz Chaim is buried in Radin. I've just checked it. The Chafetz Chaim is buried in Radin, which is where he, of course, was the head of the community there. Yes, Johnny. Last one, Johnny Halpin, before we go.
I think when Rabbi Steinsaltz says when the judge is like a king, it finishes off by saying he must also be financially independent, so that he is not dependent upon loans. So financially, he should be comfortable.
Yeah, I think that we spoke about that. I think whilst you were away from us in hospital, we spoke about this in that. They had to be wealthy so that a bribe wouldn't affect them. If you're what's his name, Bill Gates, right, and somebody tries to bribe you with a few bob, it's not going to work, is it? Because you don't need any more. It's nothing. So yes, the idea was that they should be independently wealthy, but that doesn't necessarily preclude them from actually getting a salary to maintain their wealth, because otherwise, if you're a judge for a very long time and you don't do any work, then your independent wealth will certainly diminish, and then you might be tempted to take a bribe. So the two things I don't think are mutually exclusive. Okay, let's call it a day for today. That was a really interesting discussion. We managed to get from the political machinations of the Supreme Court into all sorts of things today, into photography, into humility, and I even managed to get to show you that clip of the Chafetz Chaim, which I stumbled across purely by accident about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I've been waiting for the appropriate opportunity to share it with you, and so I managed to contrive one today. So there you are. Excellent. Wish you a Shavua Tov. I'm hoping, please God, to be traveling back next Wednesday. I've not booked anything yet, but I hope to be traveling back next Wednesday, in which case I won't be able to do the gemarrah shiur unless I take the late flight. So I will keep you posted as we go along. If I can, I will. Otherwise, we'll make it a different day just for next week. In the meantime, Chanukah Sameach, Chodesh Tov. Don't forget that it is Rosh Chodesh today. And hopefully I'll see you all very soon.
Thanks, Johnny.
Thank you, Johnny.
Safe journey back.